My husband replaced me with a younger woman on Christmas Eve, so I gave my boots to a barefoot stranger in the snow, not knowing he was a billionaire who would change my life forever. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to our main character. My name is Grace Miller, and until that night, I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like. I'd held my mother's hand as she took her last breath in a quiet hospital room. I'd worked 30 years as a nurse, watching patients slip away even when we did everything right. I'd walked out of shifts with aching feet and red eyes, telling myself that pain was just part of being human. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sound of my husband's voice on December 24th, standing in our kitchen with snow melting off his coat, as he calmly took a wrecking ball to 28 years of marriage. "I can't do this anymore, Grace." That's what he said. Not, "We need to talk." Not, "I'm struggling." Just a flat statement, like he was closing a bank account. He still had his gray wool coat on, half-zipped, little flakes of snow clinging to the shoulders. He hadn't even bothered to take off his shoes. I was standing by the oven, pulling out the apple pie I'd made from his mother's old recipe, the one he always said tastes like Christmas. The house smelled like cinnamon, butter, and sugar, warm and sweet. Our tree glowed in the living room, lights reflecting off the window, presents wrapped and stacked neatly underneath. My red and green dish towel, the one we used every Christmas, was still in my hand. I turned around, smiling the way you do when someone you love walks in from the cold. "Can't do what?" I asked. "You just got home. Sit down. Let me make you some coffee." "Dinner's almost." He shook his head, eyes fixed on the counter instead of me. That was the first sign. Rick always looked me in the eye when he was nervous. This time, he stared at the granite, at the keys he was about to set down like a period at the end of a long sentence. "I haven't been happy for a long time," he said. The dish towel slipped from my hand and fell onto the tile floor with a soft, stupid little thud. My chest tightened the way it does when you know a patient isn't just a little short of breath. 30 years in nursing teaches you to recognize when something is really, really wrong. "Rick, what are you talking about?" My voice sounded too high, too thin. "We're opening presents in the morning. You said you had something special for me this year, remember?" He finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes almost dropped me to my knees. Not anger, not guilt, pity. The way you'd look at a dog left outside in the cold because you don't want it anymore. "There's someone else," he said. My fingers curled around the edge of the counter, so hard my knuckles burned. "Someone else," I repeated, because sometimes your brain needs a second to accept that your life is being stripped for parts. "Her name is Lena," he went on, running a hand through his hair like he always did when he was nervous. "She's 28. 28. The same age I was when I married him." The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. I sank onto the barstool by the island because my legs suddenly forgot how to hold me up. "How long?" I whispered. 8 months, he said. 8 months of secret text messages. 8 months of lies about late meetings and traffic was bad, and don't wait up. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, picking out his Christmas gift, folding his socks. "She makes me feel young again," he added, and I realized he'd rehearsed this speech. "She laughs at my jokes. She wants to travel, try new things. With you, everything is so," he trailed off. I knew the words already. Predictable. Safe. Old. Suddenly, I was aware of my own body in a way I hadn't been in years. The soft belly that carried a lifetime of home-cooked meals, the faint lines at the corners of my eyes, the gray hair I'd been coloring every 6 weeks. I pictured Lena, smooth skin, bright eyes, all the things you think you're supposed to be forever. "When are you leaving?" I asked. I surprised myself with how steady I sounded. "Tonight," he answered without hesitation. "I've already moved most of my stuff to her place. I just came to talk, to be fair, to—" He gestured vaguely at the house. "Our house. The photos on the wall. The tree. The pie on the counter. How considerate of you," I said, my voice so calm it scared me. "Waiting until Christmas Eve." He winced, just a little. "I wanted to wait until after the holidays," he said. "Lena thought it wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending." That stung more than I expected. Some stranger's opinion had been weighing more than my entire marriage, and I hadn't even known her name until 10 seconds ago. The house is in both our names, I heard myself say, nurse brain going practical while my heart was bleeding out. We'll need to figure out. Keep it, he cut in quickly. I don't want to fight over things, Grace. I just want to be happy. As if happiness was something you could rip out of one life and plug straight into another. As if 28 years of shared history were just things. I walked to the window, arms wrapped tight around myself, watching snow fall over the neighborhood. Little warm squares of light glowed from every other house. Somewhere nearby, a kid squealed, probably excited for Santa. Did you ever love me? I asked, still facing the glass. The silence stretched so long I could hear the ticking clock over the stove, the soft hum of the fridge. Finally, he cleared his throat. I did, he said. But people change. I changed. I turned to look at him one last time. He stood by the door, keys in hand, his face somehow lighter now that he'd dropped this bomb. I hope she makes you happy, I said. I really do. He blinked like that wasn't the line he expected. Maybe he'd braced for screaming or begging. And maybe, a month earlier, he would have gotten it. But standing there in that cinnamon-scented kitchen, something strange slipped in beneath the pain. Relief. Not the sweet kind. Just a quiet understanding that the unease I'd been ignoring for years finally had a name. Grace, just go, I said softly. So he did. The door closed behind him, and the house swallowed me whole. I walked through the living room in a daze, past the twinkling tree and the carefully wrapped gifts that no longer had a purpose. Past our wedding photo on the mantel, two young people squinting into the June sun, so sure forever meant what they thought it did. I pulled my winter coat from the closet, wrapped my mother's blue wool scarf tight around my neck, grabbed my gloves without really thinking. I couldn't stay in that house one more minute. The air felt poisoned. Outside, the cold slapped me in the face, sharp and real, a welcome distraction from the hollow ache in my chest. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and relentless, covering driveways and mailboxes and holiday decorations in a clean white sheet, like the world was erasing itself and starting over. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anyone to call. Our friends were all couple friends, and I couldn't bear the thought of explaining that my husband had traded me in for a newer model. My sister was in California, 3 time zones away, so I did the only thing I could think of. I walked up one street and down the next, past houses where silhouettes moved behind curtains, past the elementary school where I'd volunteered at health screenings, past the church where Rick and I had said, I do, in front of God and everybody. My boots crunched through the snow, but my feet barely registered the cold. By the time I reached Memorial Park, my cheeks were numb and my breath came out in white puffs. The park was almost deserted, just a few benches lined up along a frozen pond, streetlights casting pale circles on the untouched snow. I brushed off one of the benches with my gloved hand and sat down. The metal cut through my jeans, icy enough to sting, but I didn't move. I just stared at the pond, at the reflection of the lights on the frozen surface, and let the reality sink in. My marriage was over. My future, the one I'd quietly built in my head, retirement trips, grandkids someday, slow mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles, was gone. I was 55 years old, alone on Christmas Eve, sitting on a park bench like a discarded extra in someone else's movie. And then, when I finally lifted my head to wipe my eyes, I heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Uneven. Shuffling. Coming closer. The footsteps came closer, crunching through the snow in an uneven rhythm, until a figure emerged from the soft glow of the nearest streetlight. It was a man, probably in his early 60s, wrapped in layers of clothing that looked like they had lived 3 different lives before they ever touched his shoulders. His hair was gray and uncombed, his beard rough and overgrown, and his shoulders were hunched against the cold. But that was not what made my stomach twist. It was his feet. He was barefoot, in the snow. His skin was an angry red, with patches that were already turning a frightening shade of white and bluish purple. He moved carefully, almost delicately, like every step was a question he was not sure his body could answer. My nurse brain did not care that my heart was broken or that it was Christmas Eve. Frostbite, tissue damage, risk of infection, risk of losing toes. All the words I had said to patients over the years flashed through my mind like a checklist. Sir, I called out, pushing myself up from the bench. My voice wobbled a little, but it came out louder than I expected in the quiet park. He stopped, startled, and his eyes snapped to mine. Even in the dim light, I could see that they were a striking blue. Clear. Intelligent. Not dull the way I often saw in patients who had given up. "I am fine," he said, and his voice had that rough, shaky quality that comes from cold and too many nights outside. "Just trying to find somewhere that is not completely frozen." I looked pointedly down at his bare feet. "You are not fine," I said. "You are barefoot in the snow. That is not fine in any universe I know." He followed my gaze, then shrugged with a small, almost embarrassed smile. "Someone lifted my shoes 2 nights ago while I was sleeping," he said. "Funny thing about having nothing. People will still find a way to take something from you." His words landed heavier than he probably meant them to. Maybe because I knew exactly how it felt to have the little you thought was safe suddenly ripped away. "Shelters are full on Christmas," he added. "The giving spirit has a limit, I guess." I looked at his feet again. The white patches terrified me. I had seen that look before. I knew what came next if he kept walking like that. I glanced at my own boots. They were sturdy leather, lined and waterproof, the pair Rick had insisted I buy last month because my old ones were embarrassing. They were warm, dry, safe. My feet were not in immediate danger. His were. Before I could talk myself out of it, I sat back down on the bench and started untying my laces. My fingers felt clumsy in my gloves, but I kept going. "What are you doing?" he asked, stepping closer, confusion in his eyes. "Taking off my boots," I said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I pulled one off, and the blast of cold air on my wool sock made me suck in a breath, but I kept going with the second boot. "Ma'am, you cannot give me your shoes," he said, shaking his head. "You will freeze." I looked up at him and held the boots out with both hands. "If you keep walking like that, you might lose your feet," I said. "I live 20 minutes away. I have thick socks. I will survive. Just please, let me do one good thing today." For a long second he just stood there, staring at me, like he could not quite believe what was happening. I could see the war in his expression, the struggle between pride and desperation. Finally, he reached out and took the boots, his hands trembling. I could not tell if it was the cold or something else. "My name is Grace," I said, because it felt wrong not to introduce myself after gifting a stranger my only decent footwear. "Grace Miller." He looked down at the boots in his hands, then back up at me. The corners of his mouth lifted into a small, genuine smile that made him look 10 years younger. "My name is Daniel," he said quietly. "And Grace, you have no idea what this means." He sat down carefully and slid his feet into the boots. They were a little loose on him, but as he laced them up, I watched his shoulders drop with visible relief. The boots were already warming him, already buying him time that his bare skin could not. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as he stood again, testing his weight. "Because once I walk away, I do not know if these boots will ever find their way back to you." I actually laughed, a short, surprised sound that felt strange in my chest after the evening I had just had. "I am sure," I said. "My mother used to tell me that if you help someone, you should not expect anything in return. Otherwise, you are not helping. You are just making an investment." His eyes softened at that. He reached into one of the inner pockets of his coat and pulled out something small and silver. "Then let me give you something anyway," he said, holding it out to me. "Not an exchange. Just as a thank you." I hesitated, then opened my gloved hand. He placed a small coin in my palm. It was smooth and cool, the edges worn from years of being carried. In the weak streetlight, I could just make out an inscription. I closed my fingers around it to keep from dropping it. "Thank you," I said. "But you really did not have to." "I did," Daniel replied. "You gave me something you actually needed. That is rare. I do not forget rare things." There was something in the way he said it that made a little shiver run through me, and it was not just the cold. "Where will you go now?" I asked. "There is a diner a few blocks from here that stays open all night," he answered. "If I can make it there, I can sit with a cup of coffee until morning. Thanks to you, I may actually get there with all 10 toes." "Be careful, Daniel," I said, and I meant it with my whole heart. He gave me one last look, that same gentle smile, then turned and walked away, his steps steadier now in my boots. I watched him until the snow swallowed his shape, then finally looked down at the coin in my hand. In the better light of my porch later, I would read the words engraved on it and memorize them. But right then, all I knew was that my feet were freezing, my heart was cracked wide open, And somehow, in the middle of my worst night, I had done something that felt right. I tucked the coin deep into my coat pocket, pulled my mother's scarf up over my mouth, and started the long, cold walk home in my socks, never imagining that this small act would circle back to me with 17 black SUVs and a truth that would turn my entire world upside down. By the time I made it back to my house, my toes felt like blocks of ice inside my wet socks, and my fingers were stiff even inside my gloves. But there was a strange warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with temperature. In the middle of my own disaster, I had at least kept someone else from a worse one. I dropped my keys on the same kitchen counter where Rick had ended our marriage, then went straight to the bathroom and turned on the hot water as high as it would go. Steam filled the room, fogging the mirror, and I sat on the edge of the tub, easing my numb feet into the water. The sting was immediate and sharp. A burning ache as feelings started to crawl back into my skin, and I hissed through my teeth, gripping the side of the tub until it leveled out into a dull throb. Tears slipped down my face, and for a moment I could not tell if they were from the physical pain, the emotional wreckage, or both. When I finally pulled my feet out and wrapped them in a towel, I made myself a cup of tea, the cheap chamomile I kept in the pantry, and carried it to the kitchen table. The house was too quiet. No Christmas music, no football on the television, no Rick humming under his breath as he wrapped gifts in the living room. Just the sound of the heater and the occasional creak of settling wood. I set the mug down and reached into my coat pocket for the coin Daniel had given me. It lay in my palm, small and heavy, catching the light from the overhead fixture. I rubbed my thumb over the surface until the inscription came into focus. Kindness is the only investment that never fails. I read it out loud in a whisper, the words strange but comforting on my tongue. I wondered who had given it to him, how long he had carried it, how many times he had turned it over in his fingers on nights that were probably even colder than this one. There was something almost sacred about it, this tiny piece of metal that had clearly been important to someone long before it found its way into my hand. I thought of my mother, of the way she used to say that when you give with strings attached, you are not really giving, you are bargaining. I had never seen my life as anything special, but sitting there in my kitchen, legs pulled up under me, cradling a mug of tea and a stranger's coin, I felt a flicker of something I had not felt in a long time. Maybe I was not completely worthless, even if my husband had decided I had an expiration date. The next 2 days passed in a strange blur. Christmas morning came and went without presents, without a special breakfast, without anyone to say Merry Christmas to when I woke up. I stayed in my pajamas, built a little nest of blankets on the couch, and let the television run in the background just so the house would not feel so empty. I watched holiday movies I had seen 50 times and could not remember a single plot. I dozed, cried, drank more tea, and stared at the coin on the coffee table like it might suddenly tell me what to do with the rest of my life. Every once in a while, my eyes would drift to the front window, half expecting Rick's car to pull into the driveway, half terrified that it might. He did not come. The silence of that fact was loud. On the second afternoon, sometime after lunch, I muted the television because I thought I heard thunder, a low, steady rumble that did not fit the gray, frozen sky outside. The sound grew louder, more mechanical, like engines. I frowned, set the remote down, and stood up, wrapping my cardigan tighter around myself as I walked to the front window. What I saw made my brain stutter. One black SUV turned onto my street. Then another, and another. They pulled up in a line like something out of a movie, engines humming smoothly, paint so shiny it almost reflected the winter sky. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 5, 10, 17. 17 identical black SUVs parked along the curb in front of my modest little house and the neighbors on either side. My first thought was that someone important had gotten the wrong address. My second thought was that maybe I had finally fallen asleep in front of the television and was dreaming. The doors started opening almost in unison. Men dressed in dark suits stepped out, some with earpieces, moving with a kind of casual precision that screamed training. My heart kicked up hard enough to make me dizzy. This was not for me, I told myself. There was no way this circus was for a 55-year-old retired nurse who had spent the last 2 days crying into used tissues. Then the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the hallway, far too normal for what was happening outside. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry, and forced my legs to carry me to the door. I peeked through the peephole, and the world tilted. Standing on my porch, wearing a perfectly tailored black suit and polished shoes instead of rags and bare feet, was the same man I had met in the park. His hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed, his posture straight and confident. He did not look like a homeless man. He looked like someone who owned entire buildings. He looked like a man who was used to people opening doors for him. I stared for a long second, then finally unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches. "Daniel," I breathed. His smile was small but unmistakably warm. "Hello, Grace," he said, as if we were old friends. "May I come in? I think we should talk." For a second, I just stared at him through the crack in the door, my mind scrambling to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. The man on my porch was both a stranger and someone I had already shared one of the most vulnerable nights of my life with. I finally forced myself to open the door wider. The cold rushed in around him, but somehow he seemed completely at ease, like he was used to standing in doorways and waiting for people to decide what to do with him. "This is not a bad dream, right?" I managed, my voice small. "You really are Daniel, the man from the park." His smile deepened. "Yes, I am that Daniel. May I come in, Grace? I promise I will explain everything." I hesitated for one heartbeat, then stepped back and motioned him inside. If this was some bizarre scam, it was the most elaborate one I had ever seen, complete with 17 matching vehicles and a team of men who looked like they could lift my whole house. Daniel stepped into my living room, taking in the Christmas tree, the cold fireplace, the blankets piled on the couch. Snow still clung to his shoulders, but his presence filled the space with a strangely calm energy. I shut the door, suddenly aware that I was in an old sweater and leggings, hair pulled into a messy knot. "You look different," I said, because my brain could not think of anything more intelligent. "That is because this is what I actually look like most days," he replied gently. "What you saw in the park was a costume." I folded my arms, partly to keep warm, partly to hold myself together. "So who are you really?" I asked. "And why are there enough black SUVs outside to film an action movie?" A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black wallet, then handed me a business card. The paper was thick, the letters embossed in silver. "Daniel Cole," I read slowly. "Chief Executive Officer, Cole Industries." I looked up at him. The name rang a distant bell from news headlines, but I had never connected it to a barefoot man in a snowstorm. "That is a very fancy way of saying billionaire, is it not?" My voice shook a little as I tried to make a joke. "So you were telling me I gave my boots to a billionaire on Christmas morning." "You gave your boots to a man whose feet were freezing," he corrected softly. "You did not know or care who I was." "That is exactly the point." I sank onto the edge of the couch, the business card still in my hand. "I do not understand," I admitted. "Why pretend to be homeless? Why walk around barefoot in the snow? Why come here now?" Daniel sat down in the armchair across from me, leaving a respectful distance. "6 months ago, my wife died," he began, his voice dropping. "Her name was Elizabeth. We had been married for 32 years. She was the heart of everything I built. She was a social worker before I convinced her to help me start a foundation. She believed our money only mattered if it helped people who did not have the advantages we did." He paused, jaw tightening for a moment before he went on. "When she died, the funeral was full of people. Many of them were there for the wrong reasons. They wanted to be seen, to network, to position themselves for whatever would come next. I realized I did not know who actually cared about me as a person and who only cared about my name on a building." I listened, the sharp edges of my own grief softening as I recognized something in his. "So you decided to test people," I said slowly, "by becoming someone they could ignore." He nodded. "I started going out in disguise. Old clothes, no shave, no driver, no security in sight. Sometimes I sat outside my own buildings. Sometimes I chose random places. I wanted to know how people treated a man who had nothing to offer them. Most walked past. Some were polite, a few were kind. They gave loose change, directions to a shelter, sometimes a cup of coffee." His gaze found mine, steady and unflinching. "But no one did what you did, Grace. No one gave me something they actually needed. No one looked at my terrible situation and said, without hesitation, that their comfort could wait." I felt my face flush. "They were just boots," I protested weakly. Daniel reached down beside his chair and lifted a familiar pair of brown leather boots, cleaned and polished. They looked almost new. They were not just boots to me, he said. They were proof that the kind of person my wife believed and still exists. That her faith and kindness was not naive. He set the boots gently on the coffee table, then gestured toward my hand. Do you still have the coin? I looked down, realizing my fingers had curled around it out of habit. I had slipped it into my pocket earlier without thinking. Slowly, I opened my palm to show him the small silver circle. The words, "Kindness is the only investment that never fails," gleamed under the lamp. Something moved in his eyes when he saw it, a flash of pain and affection mixed together. That coin belonged to Elizabeth, he said quietly. She carried it in her pocket every day for years. After she died, I kept it. I told myself I would know when it was time to give it to someone else. On Christmas morning, when you took off your boots and put them into my hands, I knew. My throat tightened. Why me? I whispered. Because you did the right thing on the worst night of your own life, Daniel replied. Because you were sitting alone on a park bench with a broken heart, and you still chose to protect a stranger before yourself. That tells me more about your character than any resume, any recommendation, any interview ever could. The word resume made something in my brain flicker. He was talking like a man making an assessment, not just offering gratitude. I swallowed hard. So this, I said slowly, glancing at the boots, the coin, the business card, is not just a thank you visit, is it? A small smile curved his mouth. No, Grace, he said. It is not. I came to return your boots. I came to tell you the truth. And I came with an offer that could change the rest of your life, if you choose to take it. For a moment, I could not speak. The words, offer that could change the rest of your life, just hung there between us, heavier than the winter sky outside. I wrapped my fingers tighter around the coin, as if its small weight could anchor me. What kind of offer? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, his tone calm and deliberate, like a doctor explaining a diagnosis he had thought through very carefully. You know from the card that I run Coal Industries, he said. But what you may not know is that there is a second half to everything we do. The Coal Second Chances Foundation. My wife built it with me from the ground up. It is the part of my work that mattered most to her. We give away hundreds of millions of dollars every year to hospitals, shelters, schools, disaster relief, you name it. But since she died, something has felt wrong about how we are doing it. I blinked, trying to imagine numbers like that. Hundreds of millions. It felt like a language from another planet. Wrong how? I asked. On paper, it looks impressive, he admitted. The board is full of people with business degrees and long resumes. They know how to read reports, evaluate grant applications, make sure the money is accounted for. But very few of them understand what it actually feels like to be on the other side of those grants. To be the person in the hospital bed, not the one reading the chart. To be the one standing in line at a shelter, not the one signing the donation check. He held my gaze. You do. I laughed, but it came out shaky. I am a retired nurse who just got left by her husband in the middle of making a Christmas pie, I said. That is not exactly a powerful job description. On the contrary, Daniel replied. You have spent 30 years at bedsides, in waiting rooms, on the worst days of people's lives. You know what real need looks like. You know what actually helps and what only looks like help from a distance. And I saw something Christmas morning that no degree can teach. He took a breath, then spoke the words that would replay in my mind for days. I want you to come work for me, Grace. Not as a nurse. As the Director of Human Impact and Community Strategy for the Coal Second Chances Foundation. The title sounded almost ridiculous in my tiny living room, like something that belonged in a glass tower downtown, not in a one-story house that still smelled faintly like apples and heartbreak. Director, I repeated slowly. Daniel, I have never even been a manager. I have never worn anything with shoulder pads that was not part of a scrub jacket. I do not know anything about running a foundation. You know people, he countered. You know pain. You know how to listen when someone is too proud to ask for help, and how to act when no one else is moving. That is what I need. The rest we can teach you. I can hire consultants, trainers, assistants. What I cannot buy is integrity and instinct. I shook my head, trying to process the image of myself in any kind of executive role. Even if I said yes, I am 55 years old, I said. No one starts over at my age in a job that important. Daniel's expression softened, and there was a hint of a sad smile at the corner of his mouth. I started going undercover after 50, he said. My wife launched the idea for the foundation when she was 48. The world has done a very good job of convincing people that they expire once they are no longer shiny and new. I do not subscribe to that. Your age is exactly why I want you. You are old enough to have seen how systems fail people and young enough to still want to fix it. My heart thudded unevenly. What would this job even look like? I asked, forcing myself to stay practical. You would help us rethink how we give, he explained. You would come with me to visit the shelters, the clinics, the small community programs that do not have a polished brochure but have a line out the door. You would sit with people, ask questions, figure out what they actually need instead of what looks good in our annual report. You would help us design projects that restore dignity, not just keep statistics up. And you would have the authority to say, this works or this is just for show. A part of me lit up at that. A part that remembered every time I had watched a patient struggle because someone in an office far away had made a cold decision. Then reality crashed back in. You were talking about a lot of responsibility, I said. I could mess things up. I could embarrass you. I could embarrass myself. Daniel shook his head. If you take this job and you struggle, he said, I will get you every bit of training and support you need. But I am more afraid of putting one more person in that role who thinks numbers are the same as lives. I have seen what those decisions do. I would rather trust someone whose first instinct was to give away her boots than someone whose first instinct is to preserve their comfort. He reached into his jacket again and placed another card on the table, this one with a direct number written in neat handwriting across the bottom. The salary would be $120,000 a year, he added quietly. Full health benefits, of course. A housing allowance if you decide to move closer to our main offices. I am not offering charity, Grace. I am offering partnership. The number made my breath catch. It was more money than I had ever made, more money than Rick had made in his best year. Money that could mean security, independence, choices I had never even considered. I stared at the card, at my boots on the table, at the coin in my hand. My old life and a possible new one were suddenly side by side in front of me. I am not asking for an answer tonight, Daniel said, standing slowly. You have been through a lot. Take some time. Think about what you want your next chapter to look like. Then call me, even if your answer is no. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair and walked to the door. Before he stepped out, he looked back at me one more time. For what it is worth, he said. My wife always believed that when you plant kindness, it grows into things you never expected. I think you just planted something very big, Grace. I hope you will let yourself see what it becomes. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving me alone with a polished pair of boots, a silver coin, a business card that felt like a portal, and a choice I had never imagined I would have to make. The next 3 days, that business card sat on my kitchen table like it was watching me. Every time I walked past, my eyes were drawn to the raised silver letters spelling out Daniel Cole and the handwritten number beneath, as if the ink itself were humming with possibility. I must have picked it up and put it down 100 times, the edges growing soft under my fingers. $120,000 a year. Director of Human Impact and Community Strategy. The words felt too large for my mouth, like I was trying on a dress 2 sizes too big. Part of me was thrilled by the thought of being needed again, of using all those years of nursing for something bigger than charting and discharge instructions. Another part of me whispered all the fears I had collected over 55 years. You are too old. You are not smart enough. You will embarrass yourself, and everyone will see you do it. On the 3rd afternoon, the doorbell rang again. For one wild second, I wondered if Daniel had changed his mind about giving me time. But when I checked the peephole, my stomach dropped. Rick stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of red roses from the grocery store, the plastic wrap still on. He looked tired, his hair a little messier than usual, his jaw shadowed with stubble. I opened the door just enough to speak. What are you doing here, Rick? I asked. We need to talk, he said, shifting his weight nervously. I have been thinking and I made a mistake. The words landed with a dull thud. If he had said them 3 days earlier, maybe they would have hit differently. Now they just floated on top of everything else. Lena is not what I thought. He continued quickly when I did not answer. She is demanding. She expects me to pay for everything. And when I told her I could not keep up with the lifestyle she wanted, she started seeing someone else. I realized what I gave up with you. We had something stable, something safe. We can fix this, Grace. I can come home. I stared at him, then glanced back at my living room, where the boots Daniel had cleaned for me sat by the door, and a stack of nonprofit management books I had picked up from the library lay on the coffee table. You did not come here because you suddenly remembered you love me, I said slowly. You came here because the younger woman traded you in for a wealthier model. His face flushed. That is not fair, he argued. You know things between us were not perfect. You have always been too emotional, always throwing yourself into other people's problems. You need someone practical. I am just saying, do not throw away 28 years for some midlife fantasy. You are 55 years old, Grace. You are not going to go become some big executive now. Be realistic. There it was, laid out like a cold slab on the table. Be realistic. You are too old. You are too much. You are not enough. I felt something inside me click into place, like a door finally closing all the way. You should go, Rick, I said quietly. I am not interested in being your backup plan. He started to protest, but I closed the door gently but firmly and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps retreat down the walkway. Instead of crying, I found myself laughing, a small disbelieving sound. He had just handed me the final piece of clarity I needed. I walked to the kitchen, picked up Daniel's card, and before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number. It rang only once. This is Daniel, his familiar voice answered. Hello, this is Grace, I said, my heart pounding. Grace Miller. There was a smile in his answer, even over the phone. I was hoping you would call, he said. How are you holding up? I have been better, I admitted. But I have also been worse. I have been thinking about your offer. I have questions. Ask me anything, he replied. If I take this job and I am terrible at it, will you fire me? I blurted, half joking, half completely serious. Daniel chuckled softly. If you take this job and you struggle, he said, I will get you whatever training you need. I am not looking for perfection, Grace. I am looking for the person whose first instinct in a crisis is to move towards someone else's pain. I swallowed hard. Then yes, I said finally. I want to do it. I want to see if there is more for me than being the woman a man decided was too old to love. There was a pause, then a warmth in his voice that wrapped around me like my mother's blue scarf. Welcome to the Cole's Second Chances Foundation, Grace, he said. How do you feel about starting Monday? Monday came faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet that morning, staring at a lifetime of sensible shoes and cardigans, then reached for a navy dress I had bought years ago and never worn because Rick said it was too bold for your age. I slipped it on, added a simple necklace, and looked at myself in the mirror. I still saw the lines and the gray at my roots, but I also saw something else. A woman who had walked through fire and was still standing. The Cole Second Chances Foundation took up the top floors of a glass and steel building downtown, the kind of place I would have rushed past on my way to a bus stop without ever looking up. As the elevator doors opened, a young woman with kind eyes and a neat bun stepped forward with her hand outstretched. Mrs. Miller? I am Sarah Chun, Mr. Cole's assistant, she said. We are very happy to have you here. Those words, happy to have you here, settled over all the little cracks in me like a bomb as I followed her past framed photographs of clinics, schools, and smiling faces from countries I had never been to. For the first time in a long time, I was walking into something unknown, not because someone else needed me to, but because I had chosen it for myself. Sarah led me down a hallway lined with glass walls and soft carpet that swallowed the sound of our footsteps. Behind the glass, I could see people at desks, on phones, gathered around tables covered in folders and laptops. It felt like a different planet from the fluorescent hospital halls I was used to. She stopped in front of a set of double doors and smiled. Mr. Cole is waiting for you in the conference room, she said, opening the door. Daniel stood by a floor to ceiling window, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city. Morning light poured in behind him, turning the skyline into a hazy gray-blue painting. When he turned and saw me, his whole face lit up in a way that made my heart stutter just a little. Grace, he said warmly, you look like you belong here. No one had ever said that to me about a place like this. I felt my cheeks flush. I am still getting used to the idea, I admitted. He gestured toward a large table where a few people were already seated. Let me introduce you to the team, he said. This is our finance director, our legal counsel, and this, he added, nodding to a woman with sharp eyes and a stack of neatly organized folders, is Janet, our interim foundation director. Janet has been keeping the ship afloat for the last 6 months. Janet gave me a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I could almost read her thoughts. Middle-aged nurse, no nonprofit experience, parachuted into a senior role because the boss took a liking to her story. I could not blame her. I would have wondered the same thing in her place. As the morning went on, I sat through presentations and overviews that made my head spin, charts and graphs about grant cycles, impact assessments, funding portfolios. I took notes furiously, not because I thought I would remember everything right away, but because writing helped me feel less like I was drowning. When they talked about programs that had underperformed, I heard the word failure and pictured faces instead of numbers. During a break, Janet approached me by the coffee station. "Big first day, huh?" she said, pouring herself a black coffee. "We are trying not to overwhelm you." There was a hint of challenge in her tone. I smiled honestly. "It is a lot," I said, "but it is also important. I know I have a steep learning curve. I am not here to tell you how to do your jobs better. I am here to ask different questions from a different angle. I hope that can be useful." Something in her expression eased, just a fraction. "We will see," she said. "Daniel speaks very highly of you. That goes a long way here." The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings and introductions. Daniel and I spent hours going over case studies of past grants, comparing them to what actually happened on the ground. I found myself saying things like, if this clinic did not get funding for full-time staff, who exactly is running the free health screenings? And what happens to these families after the food program ends? Questions that made some people frown and others lean in. On Friday afternoon, I was in the lobby, studying a wall display of photos from a shelter the foundation supported, when Sarah approached looking uneasy. "Mrs. Miller," she said, "there is someone here asking for you. He says he is your husband." My stomach dropped. "My ex-husband." I corrected automatically, but my hands still trembled a little as I followed her to the reception area. Rick stood near the front desk, staring up at the high ceilings and modern art like he had wandered into the wrong building. He had put on his best suit and the tie I had given him 3 birthdays ago, the one with tiny navy stripes. When he saw me, his face shifted into the practiced, apologetic expression I knew too well. "Grace," he said, stepping toward me. "Wow, this place is impressive. How did you even get a job here?" "I was offered it," I said evenly. "What do you want, Rick?" He lowered his voice, glancing around at the staff who were pointedly trying not to stare. "I want to talk about us," he said. "This is not you playing executive in some fancy foundation. This will blow over. When they realize you do not belong here, you will come home. We can still fix things." Anger flared hot and clean in my chest. Before I could respond, I felt a presence at my side. Daniel had walked up silently, his expression calm, but his eyes very, very focused. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. "Daniel," I said, exhaling slowly. "This is my ex-husband, Rick Hayes." "Rick, this is Daniel Cole, the founder of the foundation I work for." I watched the realization cross Rick's face like a storm front. His posture straightened, his handshake suddenly eager. "Mr. Cole," he said, turning on his old salesman charm, "I have heard of your company. Incredible what you have built here. And you hired Grace. That is very generous of you." Daniel shook his hand briefly, then let go, his gaze returning to me as if Rick were a minor detail. "There is nothing generous about hiring the right person for the job," he said. "Grace has been invaluable this week." I could see Rick bristle slightly at that. "She has always had a soft spot for lost causes," he said with a forced laugh. "You know nurses, hearts bigger than their heads. It is sweet, but not very practical in the long run." The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. Daniel's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "I have found," he said, "that the people who dismiss compassion as impractical are usually the ones who have never had the courage to practice it themselves." He looked Rick square in the eye. "In this building, we measure worth in kindness, not convenience." For a second, no one spoke. The receptionist pretended to type something very important. Rick's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked between us, suddenly smaller in his expensive suit. "Well," he muttered, straightening his tie, "I can see you are busy. We will talk another time, Grace." "I do not think we will," I replied quietly. "Goodbye, Rick." I watched him leave through the glass doors, his reflection swallowed by the mirrored surface as they closed behind him. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I did not feel abandoned by him. I felt released. I turned to find Daniel watching me, his eyes gentle. "Are you all right?" he asked. I took a breath, feeling the weight that had sat on my chest for weeks finally lift. "I think," I said slowly, "that I am more than all right. I think I am exactly where I am supposed to be." 6 months later, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and almost did not recognize the woman looking back at me. My hair was trimmed into a softer shape. The tired gray at the roots blended into a color that actually flattered me, and there was a light in my eyes that had been missing for years. I fastened the simple silver necklace Daniel had given me after we completed our first major project together, a pendant in the shape of a tiny circle that reminded me of the coin I still kept on my dresser. Today was the grand opening of the Second Chances Community Center, the most ambitious project the foundation had taken on since I arrived, and the one that felt the most personal. We had bought and renovated an old warehouse in the same neighborhood where I had first met Daniel barefoot in the snow. Now it was a bright, welcoming space with classrooms, a job training lab, counseling rooms, a child care wing, and a community kitchen. It was exactly the kind of place Elizabeth had described in her old notes, the ones Daniel had shared with me late one night in his office when we were trying to imagine what true impact could look like. When I pulled into the parking lot, the center was already buzzing. A local news van was parked near the entrance, and families were walking in and out, children tugging on hands, volunteers in matching T-shirts handing out flyers. A banner over the door read, "Second Chances Community Center Grand Opening," and seeing those words made my throat tighten. Sarah met me at the entrance, her clipboard tucked against her chest. "You made it," she said with a grin. "Daniel is inside with Rosa, going over the program one last time. The media are very interested in how fast this came together. They keep asking who came up with the community first approach." I felt my cheeks warm. "Tell them it was a team effort," I said. Because it was. Inside, the building felt alive. In one room, I could see computers lined up for digital literacy classes. In another, shelves filled with books and toys for the child care program. On one wall near the lobby, someone had painted a mural of a tree with deep roots and wide branches, each branch labeled with a word like dignity, hope, healing, and work. Rosa, the woman Daniel had hired to direct the center, spotted me and rushed over, pulling me into a hug. "Grace," she said, her eyes bright. "Look at this place. When you came to see our little basement support group months ago, I never imagined we would end up here." I smiled, remembering that cramped, overcrowded room, the homemade coffee pot in the corner, the people who had sat on folding chairs and shared their stories with raw honesty. "You were already doing the work," I said. "We just helped you do it on a bigger scale." The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. Staff, community members, and donors filled the folding chairs set up in the main hall. Daniel spoke first about Elizabeth's vision and how this center was a continuation of her belief that every person deserved a second chance, no matter how many times life had knocked them down. Then Rosa spoke about growing up in this neighborhood and how much it meant to have a place that said, in every brick and beam, "You matter." When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone, my hands shaking slightly. I took a breath and let my eyes travel over the crowd. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. My marriage had ended, my career as a nurse had closed, and I could not picture anything ahead of me that did not feel empty. But then something unexpected happened. On the worst night of my life, I had the chance to do one decent thing for someone else. I did not know that small act would lead me here, to this room, to this center, to all of you. I talked about how often we underestimate the power of ordinary kindness, how we assume it disappears into the dark when in reality it plants seeds we cannot see yet. I admitted that I had believed I was too old to start over, that I was finished growing. "This center," I said, "is proof that it is never too late. Not too late for communities. Not too late for families. Not too late for people like me who thought their story was already written." As I spoke, I caught a glimpse of someone standing near the back, half hidden by a camera tripod. It was Rick. For a heartbeat our eyes met. There was something in his expression I had never seen before, a mix of regret and a grudging respect. For the first time, his opinion did not feel like a verdict on my worth. It felt like background noise. After the ribbon was cut and the crowd began to explore the building, I stepped out into the small garden behind the center to catch my breath. Raised beds were already filled with soil, ready for the spring planting program the neighborhood kids would run. I stood there, thinking of my mother's love of gardens and how she used to say that you plant without guarantees, trusting that something will grow. I heard footsteps on the gravel and turned to see Daniel walking toward me, 2 paper cups of coffee in his hands. He handed one to me and looked around the garden with a soft smile. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it," I corrected. He shook his head. "Grace, the foundation's impact has increased dramatically since you brought the community first model. Our reports look better, yes, but more importantly, I am seeing faces change, not just numbers. That is you." My chest ached in that good, full way. "Thank you," I said. There was a pause, a small shift in the air between us. Daniel set his coffee down on the low garden wall and turned to face me fully, his expression more vulnerable than I had ever seen it. "There is something I have been wanting to ask you," he said. "I know we work together. I know you are still healing from what happened with your marriage. But these past 6 months have been the first time since Elizabeth died that I have felt genuinely hopeful. A big part of that is you." My heart thumped hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. He took a breath. "Would you consider having dinner with me tonight? Not as my director, as Grace, as the woman who gave her boots to a stranger and somehow gave me back my faith in people at the same time." For a moment, all the noise of the event faded. I thought about the park bench, the coin on my dresser, the way my life had cracked open and somehow made room for something new. I smiled, feeling both nervous and very sure. "Yes," I said softly. "I would like that very much." 3 years later, I stood in that same garden behind the Second Chances Community Center. Only this time I was wearing an ivory dress instead of a name badge, and the people gathered around the raised beds and flower pots were not just community members and staff. They were my family, the kind you collect along the way when life has broken you open and then handed you back something better than what you lost. Fairy lights were strung between the trees, casting a soft glow over the vegetable plots and the small stage where a string quartet was playing quietly. The mural of the tree on the wall inside had been echoed out here in the garden, with real branches wrapped in ribbons where guests had tied little cards with handwritten wishes for the future. I smoothed my hands over the front of my dress and felt the familiar worn edges of the silver coin tucked safely into the small pocket sewn into the lining. I had insisted the seamstress add it when we did the final fitting. "For luck?" I had said, but in truth it was more than that. It was a reminder of how all of this had started. Sarah peeked around the door, her eyes shining. "They are ready for you," she whispered. "How are you feeling?" I took a breath and smiled. "Like I am about to step into a life I never even knew I was allowed to want," I said honestly. When the music shifted and I stepped out into the garden, everyone turned. I caught glimpses of familiar faces. Rosa standing with a group of teenagers from the job program, a shelter director wiping her eyes, volunteers, staff, even some of the families whose lives had intertwined with ours through the center. Near the back, I saw Rick for just a moment, standing quietly with his hands in his pockets. This time when our eyes met, there was no bitterness, no sharp twist of pain, just a distant, polite acknowledgement between 2 people whose stories had gone in very different directions. Then my gaze found Daniel, waiting for me at the end of the aisle that had been laid out between the garden beds. He wore a simple dark suit and a tie that matched the soft blue of the sky at dusk. For a man whose name was on skyscrapers, he looked almost boyish in his nervousness, his smile wide and a little unsteady as I walked toward him. When I reached him, I realized he was holding something in his hands. He knelt down, very carefully, and set a small velvet cushion on the ground. Resting on it were my old brown boots, the ones I had given him that night in the snow, now cleaned, restored, and fitted with a thin band of silver around the top of each shaft. Along the silver band, tiny engraved letters caught the light. "December 25th, the night you saved us both." The guests murmured softly as they recognized them. My eyes filled with tears. "I thought it was only fair," Daniel said, looking up at me with a smile that made my heart feel too big for my chest. "You gave me your boots when you thought you had nothing left. Today I would like to give them back to you as something that will always remind us where we began." Very slowly, he helped me slip off my simple wedding flats and step into the boots. They fit perfectly, and somehow, standing there in a white dress and silver-trimmed boots in the middle of a garden we had built together, I felt more like myself than I ever had in my entire life. When we exchanged vows, Daniel spoke about second chances, about how he had thought his life was finished the day he buried his wife, and how a woman sitting on a park bench in the snow had proven him wrong. I spoke about being left in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and pain, about walking out into the cold believing I had been thrown away, only to find that I was actually being set free. At the reception, as the sun went down and the lights grew brighter, we gathered near the entrance of the center where a new plaque had been installed. At the top was the name Cole's Second Chances Foundation, and just below it, fixed into the metal, was the original coin that had once lived in Daniel's pocket and then in mine. The inscription had been expanded with a single added line. Kindness is the only investment that never fails, and sometimes it returns as the life you were meant to live. Guests lined up to touch it like a good luck charm. I watched teenagers who had once slept in cars press their fingers to it, watched young mothers with toddlers on their hips, watched former patients from free clinics we had funded. Every one of them proof that the words were true. Later that night, when most of the guests had gone and the garden had grown quieter, Daniel and I sat together on the same bench where he had asked me to have dinner months before. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the soft wool of the shawl I had wrapped around us both, my mother's old blue scarf now stitched into the lining like a hidden blessing. "Do you ever think about that first night?" I asked softly. "Every day," he said. "I think about a woman who thought her story was over, but still chose to give away the only warm shoes she had. I think about how that one act rewrote everything for both of us." I looked up at the stars beginning to appear above the city lights and felt a deep, quiet gratitude settle over me. "Sometimes," I said, "the worst day of your life is just the first day of the life you were actually meant to live." Now, as you listen to my story, I wonder about yours. Have you ever had a moment that felt like an ending, but later turned out to be a beginning in disguise? What would you do if life handed you a second chance when you least expected it? If you feel like your story is over, I hope you remember a woman in a snowy park, a pair of boots, and a coin that says kindness never fails. Because you never know, the next small, brave thing you do might be the very thing that leads you exactly where you truly belong.